Part II, Chapter 10 of 800 Leagues on the Amazon. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Christine. 800 Leagues on the Amazon by Jules Verne. Part 2, The Cryptogram. Chapter 10, A Cannon Shot. Benito then had disappeared beneath the vast sheet which still covered the corpse of the adventurer. Ah, if he had had the power to divert the waters of the river, to turn them into vapor, or to drain them off; if he could have made the Frias basin dry downstream, from the bar up to the influx of the Rio Negro, the case hidden in Torres' clothes would already have been in his hand. His father's innocence would have been recognized. Joam Dacosta, restored to liberty, would have again started on the descent of the river, and what terrible trials would have been avoided! Benito had reached the bottom. His heavy shoes made the gravel on the bed crunch beneath him. He was in some 10 or 15 feet of water, at the base of the cliff, which was here very steep, and at the very spot where Torres had disappeared. Near him was a tangled mass of reeds and twigs and aquatic plants, all laced together, which assuredly during the researches of the previous day no pole could have penetrated. It was consequently possible that the body was entangled among the submarine shrubs, and still in the place where it had originally fallen. Hereabouts, thanks to the eddy produced by the prolongation of one of the spurs running out into the stream, the current was absolutely nil. Benito guided his movements by those of the raft, which the long poles of the Indians kept just over his head. The light penetrated deep through the clear waters, and the magnificent sun, shining in a cloudless sky, showed its rays down into them unchecked. Under ordinary conditions, at a depth of some 20 feet in water, the view becomes exceedingly blurred, but here the waters seemed to be impregnated with a luminous fluid, and Benito was able to descend still lower without the darkness concealing the river bed. The young man slowly made his way along the bank. With his iron-shod spear he probed the plants and rubbish accumulated along its foot. Flocks of fish, if we can use such an expression, escaped on all sides from the dense thickets like flocks of birds. It seemed as though the thousand pieces of a broken mirror glimmered through the waters. At the same time scores of crustaceans scampered over the sand like huge ants hurrying from their hills. Notwithstanding that Benito did not leave a single point of the river unexplored, he never caught sight of the object of his search. He noticed, however, that the slope of the river bed was very abrupt, and he concluded that Torres had rolled beyond the eddy toward the center of the stream. If so, he would probably still recover the body, for the current could hardly touch it at the depth, which was already great, and seemed sensibly to increase. Benito then resolved to pursue his investigations on the side where he had begun to probe the vegetation. This was why he continued to advance in that direction, and the raft had to follow him during a quarter of an hour, as had been previously arranged. The quarter of an hour had elapsed, and Benito had found nothing. He felt the need of ascending to the surface, so as to once more experience those physiological conditions in which he could recoup his strength. In certain spots, where the depth of the river necessitated it, he had had to descend about 30 feet. He had thus to support a pressure almost equal to an atmosphere, with the result of the physical fatigue and mental agitation which attack those who are not used to this kind of work. Benito then pulled the communication cord, and the men on the raft commenced to haul him in, but they worked slowly, taking a minute to draw him up 2 or 3 feet, so as not to produce in his internal organs the dreadful effects of decompression. As soon as the young man had set foot on the raft, the metallic sphere of the diving dress was raised, and he took a long breath and sat down to rest. The pirogues immediately rowed alongside. Manuel, Fragoso, and Araujo came close to him, waiting for him to speak. "Well?" asked Manuel. "Still nothing, nothing." "Have you not seen a trace?" "Not one." "Shall I go down now?" "No, Manuel," answered Benito. "I have begun, I know where to go. Let me do it." Benito then explained to the pilot that his intention was to visit the lower part of the bank up to the bar of Frias, for there the slope had perhaps stopped the corpse, if, floating between the two streams, it had in the least degree been affected by the current. But first he wanted to skirt the bank and carefully explore a sort of hole formed in the slope of the bed, to the bottom of which the poles had evidently not been able to penetrate. Araujo approved of this plan and made the necessary preparations. Manuel gave Benito a little advice. "As you want to pursue your search on that side," he said, "the raft will have to go over there obliquely. But mind what you are doing, Benito. This is much deeper than where you have been yet. It may be 50 or 60 feet, and you will have to support a pressure of quite 2 atmospheres. Only venture with extreme caution, or you may lose your presence of mind, or no longer know where you are or what to do. If your head feels as if in a vise, and your ears tingle, do not hesitate to give us the signal, and we will at once haul you up. You can then begin again if you like, as you will have got accustomed to move about in the deeper parts of the river." Benito promised to attend to these hints, of which he recognized the importance. He was particularly struck with the fact that his presence of mind might abandon him at the very moment he wanted it most. Benito shook hands with Manoel. The spur of the diving dress was again screwed to his neck, the pump began to work, and the diver once more disappeared beneath the stream. The raft was then taken about 40 feet along the left bank, but as it moved toward the center of the river, the current increased in strength, the ubas were moored, and the rowers kept it from drifting, so as only to allow it to advance with extreme slowness. Benito descended very gently, and again found himself on the firm sand. When his heels touched the ground it could be seen, by the length of the haulage cord, that he was at a depth of some 65 or 70 feet. He was therefore in a considerable hole, excavated far below the ordinary level. The liquid medium was more obscure, but the limpidity of these transparent waters still allowed the light to penetrate sufficiently for Benito to distinguish the objects scattered on the bed of the river, and to approach them with some safety. Besides, the sand, sprinkled with mica flakes, seemed to form a sort of reflector, and the very grains could be counted glittering like luminous dust. Benito moved on, examining and sounding the smallest cavities with his spear. He continued to advance very slowly. The communication cord was paid out, and as the pipes, which served for the inlet and outlet of the air, were never tightened, the pump was worked under the proper conditions. Benito turned off so as to reach the middle of the bed of the Amazon, where there was the greatest depression. Sometimes profound obscurity thickened around him, and then he could see nothing, so feeble was the light. But this was a purely passing phenomenon, and due to the raft which, floating above his head, intercepted the solar rays and made the night replace the day. An instant afterward the huge shadow would be dissipated and the reflection of the sands appear again in full force. All the time Benito was going deeper. He felt the increase of the pressure with which his body was wrapped in by the liquid mass. His respiration became less easy. The retractability of his organs no longer worked with as much ease as in the midst of an atmosphere more conveniently adapted for them. And so he found himself under the action of physiological effects to which he was unaccustomed. The rumbling grew louder in his ears, but as his thought was always lucid, as he felt that the action of his brain was quite clear, even a little more so than usual, he delayed giving the signal for return, and continued to go down deeper still. Suddenly, in the subdued light which surrounded him, his attention was attracted by a confused mass. It seemed to take the form of a corpse, entangled beneath a clump of aquatic plants. Intense excitement seized him. He stepped toward the mass. With his spear he felt it. It was the carcass of a huge cayman, already reduced to a skeleton, and which the current of the Rio Negro had swept into the bed of the Amazon. Benito recoiled, and, in spite of the assertions of the pilot, the thought recurred to him that some living cayman might even then be met with in the deeps near the bar of Frias. But he repelled the idea and continued his progress so as to reach the bottom of the depression. And now he had arrived at a depth of from 80 to 100 feet, and consequently was experiencing a pressure of 3 atmospheres. If then this cavity was also drowned